talking.
No, that's okay.
That was a thing in the one episode of And Just Like That I watched.
Well, now you're teasing our viewers because we're live on Facebook.
Oh, welcome, Facebook viewers.
And by now you should be watching the morning show anyway.
Yeah.
Or Sex Education.
I did watch an episode of Sex Education. How's that?
And did you start at the beginning, or are you?
I went back to the first season.
Good. The Times had a great write-up on it.
Okay.
And we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup, continuing to heal from my dire COVID experience. Actually, it was very easy. I hope any of you who get it have as easy a time, but I'm better.
Take that, Paxlovid. In the news, you're hearing about the government funding crisis. Well, the bills that they can't pass in the House are stuffed by the Republicans with anti-LGBTQ and racist amendments.
Yeah, more details on that to come. California Governor Newsom vetoed a bill to protect trans kids in custody battles, but signed other pro-LGBTQ bills.
A Florida school district banned all books with LGBTQ characters from school premises.
You thought we were exaggerating when we said they want to erase us. But students in an anti-LGBTQ school district in California walk out in protest of what's happening there.
We love signs of resistance.
Yes.
There were bomb threats against drag events and LGBTQ venues in Brooklyn, New Haven, and upstate New York as a Trump judge upheld a drag ban in Texas.
Also a bomb scare in Utah, I think. A famous gay American, you're all too young to remember that, but we'll remind you, is looking to run for mayor of New Jersey's second largest city.
We have the murders of trans women to report on in Cleveland, Arizona, and Florida.
Turkish President Erdogan, slowly losing his mind, is upset with rainbow colors in the drapes at the United Nations.
How do you think he won the election after the last earthquake?
Exactly.
The new Greek opposition leader is an out gay married man.
Anti-trans demonstrations across Canada were met by larger counter-protests.
The New York Civil Liberties Union is protesting the lack of required HIV/AIDS education in the New York City schools.
And stop the presses, Ellen is back on TV.
Welcome back, Ellen. But we start with your friend, Megan Rapinoe.
Oh, I would like her to be my friend. I think she's extremely admirable, but we lead with her today to congratulate her on her soccer career and her retirement now at the advanced age of, I'll get this in a second, 38. 38, pretty old for a pro soccer player. Anyway, she retired. She played a last game in what they call a friendly, sort of an exhibition game against South Africa that the U.S. won 2-0. But Megan Rapinoe has been such an important figure, not just in sports, but in politics and feminism and everything, certainly LGBTQ freedom. This is a picture of her a couple of years ago with Biden giving her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And that's not just for her soccer career. That is for her work as an activist. You may remember that she took a knee in support of Colin Kaepernick very early on, one of the first to do so, and got a lot of blowback on that, including from the then president, Donald Trump, who was, I don't know, was he saying she should be murdered? He's got a long list of people who should be murdered.
I don't think we want him to become president again.
May I quote you?
Yes.
But Megan Rapinoe really has made an enormous impact with her life on all fields of endeavor. And we owe her a lot of thanks for the way she's conducted herself and her willingness to be outspoken on many issues of race and homophobia and feminism and everything else, and including leading the women's soccer team to equal pay across the board. She has been a great trailblazer and deserves all the accolades she got at her retirement.
And the Census Bureau wants to find out how many out people there are in the country. They have asked the Biden administration for permission to test questions about sexual orientation and gender identity for people ages 18 and up on their annual American Community Survey that collects data for 3.5 million American households annually. The Bureau says it wants the data for civil rights and equal employment enforcement. Now, currently, the only real sort of sexual orientation related question is about people living together who are partnered. Nothing about LGBTQ people who are single or not cohabitating. So they'll be looking at how answers are provided by proxies, such as a parent or spouse who isn't the person about whom the question is being asked. So, if you live with your parents and you're, 18, it's up to the head of the household to say, yeah, I got a gay son or daughter.
It's not a perfect solution, but this is a conversation that's been going on, as far as I know, for at least 30 years. When I was involved with what is now the Williams Institute and was originally the Institute for Gay and Lesbian Strategic Studies, run by Lee Badgett, a famous lesbian economist who's been dealing with these issues for decades. And there was a push from activists to say, we have to find out how many LGBTQ people there are in the United States and around the world, but huge reluctance to do that for fear that people would not answer the question honestly. Too much stigma, too much discrimination. And it's interesting to me that we have now evolved to the point where we're seriously considering putting this question in some form on some census document, because there's been great fear about doing it. And you're right, it did start with looking at couples, and it started almost accidentally because the census did put on its forms, describe the household. And they found that there were adult people living together who described themselves as not cousins, not brother and sister, not whatever. And they were able to deduce that they were same-sex couples. And so they started accumulating this data. And then they started more formal investigation of those and encouraging people who were in same-sex couples living together to report that in some way on the forms. They found that there were such couples in 99% of counties in the United States. And so, for instance, the Institute took that information to members of Congress and said, you think you don't have anybody who's LGBTQ living in your district, but you do. And we found unexpected things like a heavy preponderance of those couples in the South. And among Black people, for instance, an overrepresentation that was unexpected.
And why don't their elected representatives care then?
That's a longer conversation, and this one's been long enough. But it is a great step forward to begin to be able to come out about asking these questions. And I think this will continue to be an evolving process. But you're right. One big stumbling block is that the way they fill out these surveys is that the head of household describes the rest of the household. And if you are not out to the head of household you're living with, a parent or whomever, you're still going to be hidden in the survey. And we're not encouraging anyone to put themselves in danger, but we are making progress in looking more formally at the population in the United States.
Well, speaking of coming out, it's been a long time since Jim McGreevey, now 66, came out as a gay American when he resigned in disgrace as governor of New Jersey. Since that was back in 2004. He studied to be an Episcopal priest, apparently now a Catholic again. He worked with incarcerated women, and he also ran the Jersey City Employment and Training Program, a prison reentry program. So now 5 Hudson County mayors want him to run for mayor of Jersey City, the second largest city in the state. He's been a resident there for 10 years, says he'll announce his plans right before Thanksgiving. Last week, he debuted his new civic association named for his parents. Oh, and he's, so he's back in the game.
Yeah, well, he's a little late to the game because there are other candidates who are already announced who are a little offended by him coming in and bigfooting them, including a Black woman politician locally there who's saying, really? We're going to get another white guy who left in disgrace some years ago?
Oh. Jersey, I don't want to offend anybody in Jersey City, but they have a long history of electing characters.
Good catch, Andy.
All right. In South Carolina, Republican Family Values Congressman Jeff Duncan, 57, has abandoned his family and moved in with his mistress, a D.C. lobbyist named Liz Williams. All this, according to his wife, Melody, in her divorce papers, who says Duncan admitted the affair to her and their 3 sons. Just last month, he spoke at the Faith and Freedom Gay Bashing Barbecue and described Melody as a supportive and loving wife. He calls himself a lifelong social conservative, but it's a sin to tell a lie.
Well, the wife says he's a lifelong philanderer, that this is only the latest of many affairs.
Yes.
And he couldn't be a bigger liar and hypocrite if he tried. Okay. Politicians behaving badly. And then politician behaving badly, and again, her hypocrisy, not necessarily her actions. Carrie Lake of Arizona. Will she be Donald Trump's running mate?
Which one is she in the picture? Oh, she's the one on the left.
The one on the left. But here she is. We've seen pictures of her when she was running for governor and condemning all of us with drag queens and calling them her great friends. And here she is again with a bunch, and we'll see how she runs this. She's certainly desperately trying to get the vice presidential nomination, and if not that, run for governor again.
Oh, that picture is probably being circulated by one of the other evil women who wants to be Trump's running mate. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey is not getting much support. Governor Murphy wants him to resign, and most Democrats do. But he's getting support from out gay George Santos, who is also under indictment.
Well, he's getting support from all the Republicans who don't want Trump to have to pull out of the race or Santos to have to give up his seat. So they say, to be consistent, they say, no, Menendez should not have to give up his seat until he's convicted either. I don't know what to make of him. There is no one more forceful in his denials and his assertion that, what are you talking about? I'm completely innocent. What's your problem?
And Senator Tim Scott is sort of trying to say he's completely heterosexual, running for president, defensive about his single status. His staff this week said he's not gay, and that's obviously hasn't come out, but we want to know who he's attracted to because he says he's got a girlfriend.
Well, I'm glad his staff can describe him as not gay because everyone else just describes him as not married.
Yeah. Anyway, and of course by the way, he rose to prominence preaching abstinence, and he later told an interviewer that he was not adhering to that practice quite as well as he had in the past, but he didn't get into specifics.
Well, and can we even believe that? I don't believe anything. I don't believe anything any of them say. Well, let's spend a minute on Trump and his relationship with General Milley.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead. Well,
this is one of the real military guys he hired to have around him, who then he felt sold him out. So then he thinks he should be executed for treason for not supporting Trump in the end. And as he was leaving, when was it? Some moment Trump turned.
Oh no, when he was up for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Trump said to him, Mattis, General Mattis, who was the defense secretary, says, "You're soft on transgenders, are you?" And Milley responded, "I'm not soft on transgender or hard on transgender. I'm about the standards in the U.S. military. I don't care who you sleep with or what you are."
Which was terrific. Exactly the right answer. But Trump now says he should be executed. And Paul Gosar says he should be executed, the absolute maniac representative from Arizona who
has no friends in his family.
Yeah, they all made ads saying he should not be elected from Arizona, but there he is. And now he's one of the gang of however many that are holding up any kind of agreement on a budget.
Well, the North Carolina legislature just gave the death penalty to democracy there, put the final nail in the coffin there, putting the legislature in charge of local election boards and taking away the governor's power to appoint majorities to the state election board. I mean, it's just these. This is, I mean, it's not news to most of you, but what is obviously hurting this country so badly is this extreme gerrymandering. Nobody fears for losing their seat, sometimes on both sides. And so they just say whatever the hell they want and do whatever the hell they want. It's not good.
And that's involved in this whole budget thing too. But what is not talked about enough is that this defense budget in particular they're trying to pass is full of anti-LGBTQ stuff, throwing transgender people out, banning drag shows at military bases, banning any kind of diversity or inclusion education.
The Senate version doesn't include these amendments. And the Senate has to get them through, cloture in the Senate, but they don't include these amendments. And of course, if the Republican House ever does pass a bill, then the Senate and the House have to negotiate. The Senate's never going to agree to these amendments.
Well, I am glad to hear you say that because it actually scares me that they might let something like those amendments go through in order to get some kind of agreement. I'd like to think you're exactly right, but
throw us under the bus. It's happened before.
Yeah, that's what worries me. And Kevin McCarthy's willingness to do anything to keep his job is just disgusting.
Well, in the meantime, the Biden administration is awarding $132 million to support at-risk youth and families in the mental health crisis. A specific $1.7 million is for counseling and support for LGBTQI youth and their families.
Well, good news on one little corner of the political world. In the state of Washington, in a small county in the southeast corner, Columbia County, a judge disallowed a proposed ballot referendum that would have closed libraries, because they include LGBT stuff. And the judge said this is unconstitutional, this proposed ballot referendum, and procedurally invalid, and the signature gathering for it was done with potentially criminal acts.
Oh, that decision is something to celebrate, and we were celebrating last week the election of Olivia Hill, the first out transgender elected official in the state of Tennessee on the Nashville Metro Council, but she may be forced to use the men's room under state law that says sex is immutable as determined by anatomy and genetics at the time of birth. Tennessee could lose $2 billion in federal funding over this kind of obstruction.
They don't care.
But, well, they say they don't. Hill says she will not change her driver's license back to male identification, but knows that she could be seen as breaking the law that, says you can't have false ID. On the other hand, she says, my colleagues have been very welcoming here on the Metro Council.
They elected an all-female Metro Council.
It's great.
Yeah, so that is good. All right, let's see what else we got here.
Well, all right, let's talk about Texas. Okay. So I'll start by saying a good federal judge decision from Judge David Hittner. He ruled that the law banning drag was unconstitutional, as many other judges have, Trump judges, Democrat judges. They say it's a violation of the First Amendment. But in this horrible judge who banned abortion pills and everything, Matthew Kacsmaryk, he allowed a ban on drag shows at West Texas A&M that the students were filing a suit they wanted to sponsor a drag show, and the president of the university said you can't, and this judge says that's okay, you can ban it. Look, the guy's a proud Christian nationalist. He's also poised to bankrupt Planned Parenthood by making them pay $1.8 billion penalty on ludicrous grounds in a suit brought by Ken Paxton, who's back as Attorney General. So, and in this decision about drag, he cites Gays Against Groomers, saying it's unclear how drag shows unmistakably communicate advocacy for LGBTQ rights. But it's what a thing for him to put it in a decision.
This is why we're in a civil war in this country now, and the two sides are so far apart and so dug in their positions. It's hard to imagine any of this is going to get worked out in any.
Yes, usually in those situations, people get divorces. All right.
Well, you have been advocating for secession for.
What else are we going to do?
Well, you may be right in the end.
Let's talk about Charlotte County, Florida.
Okay.
So you have a school district, Charlotte County, which ordered all books with LGBTQ themes and characters, that would include the Bible, being removed from classrooms and school libraries. So much for most of literature, history, sports, science, you name it. I mean, it's beyond grotesque. Now, of course, the group Popular Information has been on this case, tracking them. And eventually the school district came back and said, well, you can have books with LGBT characters in the media center for grades 9 through 12, but they can't be used for classroom instruction.
But then Judd Legum, who writes the Popular Information blog, which I highly recommend subscribing to, went back and looked at the records of what books had been excluded. And it turned out that all the LGBTQ books had been banned from the high school libraries too. So Charlotte County, which is just above Fort Myers on the west coast of Florida, is lying about getting rid of all the books.
This includes books like The Kite Runner, an international bestseller, Being Jazz by Jazz Jennings. It is grotesque.
Any book that has an LGBTQ character, living or dead, real or unreal, is verboten in the Charlotte County libraries, school classrooms, absolutely vetoed in any.
So much for the first
territory.
In California, though, in the anti-LGBTQ, say the name, Temecula district.
You'll get it one of these days.
I will. Temecula. Over 100 students walked out of the Great Oak High School to protest the policies, despite being warned they would be disciplined if they did. The Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Koulounakis, tweeted, that she was proud of them standing up to hateful attacks. The district banned pride flags and teacher's guide that referred to Harvey Milk, the school board president, referring to the slain gay leader as a pedophile. Governor Newsom threatened to fine the district over all this, and they pulled back on the instructional material issue.
Well, let's go on to what Governor Newsom has done in vetoing and signing bills this last week or two.
Yes.
He, much to everyone's consternation, he vetoed a bill that mandated that courts considering custody issues in California take into consideration each parent's willingness to affirm a child's gender identity.
He said, I got a deep commitment to trans rights, but he cautioned against government dictating in prescriptive terms that single out one characteristic. Legal standards for the judicial branch to apply, you're supposed to, judges are always supposed to apply best interests of the child. And he says that should cover it.
And he signed a number of other pro-LGBTQ bills, including one, I think, that had some version of this. The
one he signed four of them, but one of them requires foster parents to meet the needs of foster kids, regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Right. So you can't assign a foster child to a foster family if the child is trans and the parents would reject that identity.
And there's a new California law that bars school book bans on racial and LGBTQ topics.
Yeah. But wait a second. In New York, the New York Civil Liberties Union is investigating what's going on with sex ed in New York City schools, including HIV/AIDS education. Now, this is a battle that we've been involved in for 40 years.
Since 1987, anyway.
Yeah, at least. And there is a mandate for lessons every year for every
grade, 6 lessons AIDS, and they don't do them. Some of the school districts, 60% of students grades 6 through 12 and 33 districts have not received required HIV/AIDS lessons, but it's much worse in some other districts. Many districts. So,
and a lot of what's being taught is incorrect and out of date. It's just not working, and no one is monitoring it.
Yes, obviously, the highest rates of HIV transmission are in this age group and those in their 20s.
Yeah. Well, back to better news in Missouri, of all places. At Southeast Missouri State University, the school has reopened its LGBT resource center because the students demanded it. The administration had closed it down. The students said, we need this, we want it. They demonstrated, and the school listened and is reopening the center.
And among younger people in Missouri and Kansas City, Oak Park High School elected a trans homecoming queen 8 years ago and did it again this week. Tristan Young, a 17-year-old senior, was elected, writing that she had a very difficult high school journey, but that having the support of friends, family, and Oak Park High School has helped tremendously. The school district posted a note of congratulations on social media and got a predictable mix of responses: praise from LGBTQ groups, scorn from turf leader Riley Gaines, who chimed in on this. But it is student votes that counted here, not the views of outside naysayers.
And a judge's vote counted in Montana. A judge there has blocked the ban on transgender youth health care, calling the proposed ban unconstitutional and likely to have a negative impact on the kids who it affected. And the judge said, no, I am putting out a temporary injunction against that law going into effect.
Okay. In Kentucky, out gay country singer Adam Mack, we have a picture of him, was set to perform at a show in his hometown in October in Russellville. but he was told by the head of the Chamber of Commerce that some people in his community were very upset that a gay man was headlining this 80-year-old festival. And she wanted to ensure that he wouldn't be promoting homosexuality or sexuality in a family-friendly environment. He said, I just want to put on a hell of a show. So how do you sing country songs, by the way, without some reference to sexuality? People were threatening to protest. Organizers couldn't guarantee his safety because it was in a public park. They didn't have metal detectors or anything. So the concert was canceled. The fireworks were canceled. And as Mac backed out, done in by what we would call the heckler's veto, people who were going to protest.
But at least he got to wear that Maren Morris T-shirt in whatever interview he was doing. Excuse me.
All right. In Brooklyn, New York, a drag time story hour at the Cortelyou branch of the library had to be moved to another location due to a bomb threat that caused police to say you got to clear out of the library. It turned out to be a false threat. And another story hour is set there for October 28th. City council members are in talks about how to address these threats legislatively. You do that. Then there was also a bomb threat in Salt Lake City that caused them to cancel a drag event. And the New Haven Pride Center had to close on Saturday due to such a threat.
You know, bomb threats are so easy. All you have to do is pick up the phone or write an email.
Don't tell them that.
Well, I'm struck by the fact that this could become much bigger, and I'd like to find some way to interfere with this. You have to disguise yourself, I guess, if you're going to do this, although not everyone is smart enough to do that. Some kid wrote a nasty note, an anti-LGBTQ note to I can't remember who, but he included his name and his hometown and everything. And she wrote him back and said, if you're going to write threatening notes, you might want to disguise yourself. But it's something people do on the spur of the moment, I think, and it just disrupts everybody, and it's so frightening to people.
Well, I won't go into back in the day all the threats we used to get when we were, a little bit more visible in other ways. But you don't take most of them seriously, but occasionally you have to. In Virginia, 40 students protested at the Virginia Department of Education on Friday to oppose Governor Youngkin's "Don't Be Trans" policies in schools. One student said it's forcing them back in the closet in schools that they thought they were safe in. Forced off sports teams, forced out of restrooms, aligned with their gender identity. It also forces teachers to dead name trans students and use birth names and pronouns unless the child is emancipated or if the parents give written permission for this. So some school boards say, we're not going to implement these policies. And
there's wonderful pushback, but the whole trend is this backwards movement. And it's shocking when we feel we've come a long way and feel good about that. And then suddenly these people are coming out of the woodwork to push back.
Well, the Virginia Beach Board voted not to apply these policies, and two parents are suing them to make them.
Big off-year election coming up in Virginia in the next few weeks, and it's going to take the temperature of things like how successful Youngkin and his semi-disguised right-wing movement is going to be, and whether he is going to step in as a presidential candidate.
Yes. Virginia, vote, vote, vote. In Albion, New York, this is upstate, a group of fundamentalist clergy tried to shut down a 21-plus drag brunch in the town, but all they did was give it more publicity, and now it's sold out on October 1st.
Well, speaking of sold out meals, I'm impressed to see he's confused by that segue. So am I. The Human Rights Campaign is having this big national dinner in DC. I don't usually promote these, but on October 14th. But they're honoring Shonda Rhimes, Lena Waithe, Matt Bomer, and a group of teens who organized a trans youth prom And I think that's a heck of a lineup, and that they are getting a lot smarter there at the HRC under the leadership of Kelly Robinson.
All right,
In
let's
terms
talk
of
about some of the horrors of the week. In Cleveland, 32-year-old black trans woman Charm Wilson was killed by a car in her hometown. The driver was taken into custody, but we don't have word about whether charges have been filed. She was a graduate of Shaw High School and attended Cuyahoga Community College. Her funeral was September 22nd.
in Palm Bay, Florida, Alexa Sakova, 30 years old, a former Russian model, shot dead, potentially by her roommate and his girlfriend. They have been charged. Alexa was, as I say, a 30-year-old trans woman. And
she worked for Vera Models and was a former Miss Palm Bay Petite.
Yeah.
And then in Casa Grande, Arizona, a black non-binary woman, Breasia Bangs, 27 years old, was shot to death by her boyfriend, Kenton Lincoln, shot 5 times, which is what we call overkill. The family is raising money to take her back to California. We don't know a lot about, we would tell you other things that we know about these cases, but that's as much as we know.
We want to document these deaths weekly as the numbers mount. It's just overwhelming, but we don't know enough about these people's lives. But I will say that as I read these stories over the weeks and months, I'm struck by how these were often happy people, honored by their communities, loved by their family and friends, and the tragedy of their loss is just exponentially greater when you read how much people miss them.
Well, let's think about the loss of Kowalski Trawick in New York and the Bronx back in 2019. 2 cops came into the sort of the mental health living facility that he was living in and shot him to death because he was holding a bread knife, for God's sakes.
Well, he was cooking.
Yeah.
He was someone with some mental disability. He was living in this assisted living apartment building. He'd locked himself out of his apartment. He very cleverly called the fire department and said, you know, the building's on fire, help. They came, and he said, well, actually, I locked myself out of my apartment. Please open my door, which they did, and they left. But meanwhile, some neighbors had called the cops because he was getting a little loud. So he's in his apartment now, he's cooking, and the cops come and they gently force their way in, and he's holding a bread knife, and they say, put the knife down. And he says, what the hell are you doing here? Why are you in my apartment? I'm cooking. And they say, put the knife down, put the knife down, put the knife down. And the younger cop, the less experienced one, has a taser and tases Kowalski. His partner is trying to stop him. Kowalski falls to the floor, tries to get up and regain his footing, and the cop shoots him dead.
Well, and so now the development in the story is the NYPD is saying, well, you know, we were looking at this, but, you know, the CCRB got to it too late. Statute of limitations was up and we can't do anything. But of course, the police department took 18 months to give them the footage from any of this stuff from the cameras. So it's a whitewash by the New York City Police Department. That's what's going on. And, you know, the family, of course, is outraged.
Just a tragedy. And we pulled that picture of him graduating with his mother there because he was such a good guy. Another people beloved in the community, another person, and gone. Just a tragic loss of life for no reason because of inexperienced, scared police officers who just pulled the trigger.
And if we didn't say so, this is a gay man. Okay, so what's old is new again. 2 veteran gay organizational leaders have got new jobs. Matt Foreman, who led the Anti-Violence Project, the Task Force, Pride Agenda, the LGBTQ program at the Haas Foundation. He's now the executive director at the AIDS Legal Referral Panel in the Bay Area, providing free and low-cost legal assistance to people living with HIV. It's been around for 40 years. Foreman takes over for Bill Hirsch, who led it for the last 24.
Yes. All right. So international news.
Oh, well, and
Richard Burns. Yes.
Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders has named Richard Burns as their interim director. Richard has been interim director of groups for like 5 times since he left the LGBTQ Community Center in New York.
It's a great gig.
He does this frequently, and they're obviously conducting a national search. He's also the board chair of the new American LGBTQ Museum in development in New York.
Yes. All right. Now, international news.
Yes.
All right. Well, in Italy, they're about to vote in the Senate there about making foreign surrogacy a universal crime. If you are a same-sex couple and you contract with someone in another country, because it's totally illegal in Italy, but if you contract with someone in another country to bear a child for you and you bring that child back to Italy, you will now be subject to a large fine and prison.
1 million euros and prison time. So some gay couples are leaving the country as a result.
Yes. Yes. Also, 90% of those who use surrogacy in Italy are straight couples. Are they going to be prosecuted?
Well, we'll see. And that's what the government is saying. Hey, this isn't anti-gay. 80% of them are straight. So adoption and artificial insemination are not options for LGBTQ people in Italy.
Yep.
So surrogacy abroad has sort of been their only option if they want to have kids. So they're led by a fascist, Maloney, and who said surrogacy is a symbol of the abominable society that confuses desire with rights and replaces God with money. Whoa!
And they have already taken 33 lesbians off the birth certificates of their children because it was their partners who gave birth to the child. So now they're not recognized and they're persona non grata.
Well, you know, Donatella Versace received the big fashion award at La Scala last weekend, and she slammed the government's anti-gay policies, specifically this, referring to her late brother, Gianni. She got a standing ovation from the crowd.
And her award was for her humanitarian work, not just for fashion expertise. But yeah, she got up and gave a very powerful speech.
In the United Kingdom, the Home Secretary, Sue Braverman, told the U.S. American Enterprise Institute, a right-wing group, that anti-gay discrimination should not be enough to qualify for asylum. There are 1,300 asylum seekers in Britain. It's about 1.5% of the total there. But we're basing it on sexual orientation. Elton John said Braverman is further legitimizing hate and violence. Braverman says you have to be fleeing persecution, not just discrimination.
I see. And what would you call discrimination? Not persecution?
Yeah.
Well, related to the UK, the Isle of Jersey, just offshore, is slowly updating its laws, and it is going to allow naming of both same-sex parents on birth certificates and legalize the parents of a child born to a surrogate. So I'm sure they will soon see an influx of Italians to the Isle of Jersey, which is going in the opposite direction.
And the UK government, long ago under Prime Minister Theresa May and under Boris Johnson were promised we're going to ban conversion therapy. It was a popular thing at the time. They put it in their platform. And now under Rishi Sunak, they're pulling back. It's too late to get it in the King's speech in November this year. And they're just reneging on the whole thing. The Church of England called for a ban in 2017, saying the practice has no place in the modern world.
Too late at the, what was it, the 92 Democratic Convention. We got Bill Clinton to change his speech in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes.
You were a delegate then, weren't you?
I was. It's an empty position. Don't do it.
I was a Jesse Jackson delegate in 1984. We caused a lot of trouble.
Well, I caused trouble, but it's not like I had any real effect on who the nominee was going to be or anything like that.
Let's talk about Canada. A lot of action this week.
Sure.
80 cities were picketed had pickets by an anti-trans group, concerned Canadians standing together against gender ideology in schools. And they did a countrywide march. They did a march on Parliament. We have a picture there. You can see the protesters, the counter-protesters in the background, the protesters in the foreground saying, "Leave our kids alone." This went on all over the place. The counter-protesters outnumbered there you can see the one in Vancouver. That's the counter-protesters. The counter-protests were much bigger. The Prime Minister, Trudeau, condemned the anti-LGBTQ protests, saying transphobia, homophobia, and biphobia have no place in this country. We strongly condemn this hate and its manifestations, and we stand united in support of, well, he said, two-spirit LGBTQI plus Canadians. You are valid and valued, he said.
There's a lot more recognition for Indigenous peoples in Canada than there is in this woebegone country. Well, Turkey's president, Erdogan, we're never getting rid of him. He was in New York for the UN General Assembly meeting a week or two ago, and he walks into the UN and he says, "What's with all these rainbow colors and this signs of LGBTQ people?" And actually, those were colors that were put up for a summit on sustainable development goals. But he'll use any excuse to do any of that. But meanwhile, a charming story from San Diego where a nightclub owner is, poking around in the attic, and he sees these scraps of rainbow flags sticking out of boxes. And he says to the staff, "What's with these? What's up?" And they say, "Oh, they're old. They have the wrong colors. We're going to throw them away." Well, of course, they're Gilbert Baker's original colors and were part of the Sea to Sea flag he made for Key West in 2017. And a 1.25 mile long flag that went from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean and was dipped in each. And luckily, this nightclub owner said, "I know exactly what this is. I know what it means. I know what it comes from." And he looked at these and found, in fact, the original labeling on them and Gilbert's signature. So he's preserving all of those. And the Gilbert Baker Foundation heard about this, Charlie Beale, who you saw here a few weeks ago, and they arranged to give one of these flag pieces to Ukraine at the Europride Human Rights Conference in Malta. And there in the center is the flag being handed over to a representative from Ukraine as a symbol of freedom and human rights. That's Charlie, second from the left, and the bar owner on the far left. And I'm sorry I didn't write down his name. And it just was a very moving event and a great symbolic preservation of human rights in the colors of the flag.
I hope they win the war. I hope we win the war.
Yeah.
In Greece, an out gay businessman, Stefanos Kasalakis, 35 years old, was the upset winner of the race to lead the left-wing opposition party, Syriza.
Not so left wing.
Yeah, well, he only moved to Athens months ago with his American husband, Tyler Macbeth, a nurse. He himself is a Greek-American shipping executive. He seems to want to move the party to the center left, like the U.S. Democrats. He stands for tax relief, separation of church and state, legalizing same-sex marriage, which they don't have there, and citizenship for migrant children born and brought up in Greece. He moved to Massachusetts as a teenager, but says the shipping business has allowed him to reconnect with Greece. His victory has left the left-wing party in shock.
Yes. Well, he ended up with 57% of the vote, which no one was expecting, against a more traditionally leftist leader of the party. And now the question is whether he can beat the incumbent president, who is more of a right or center-right leader of Greece. And that's the next big question. He thinks as a, sort of white savior, entrepreneur, businessman who admires Bloomberg and who's the other one? He thinks that will get him elected to the presidency of Greece.
Well, they did win.
Yeah.
In Mexico, a lower court decision in Puebla in May of 2021 that denying legal recognition of polyamorous relationships was unconstitutional will now be reviewed by the first chamber of the Supreme Court. Of the country's Supreme Court. The civil code says marriage is a civil contract between two people.
In Nigeria, we told you a week or two ago about the 200 people arrested at the supposed gay wedding. May or may not have been. 69 of those were detained, but all were released on $643 bail each.
That's a lot of
Seems
money,
like
David.
a lot of money.
Right. Pope Francis's big synod gets underway early in October to deal with a range of issues, including women's issues and LGBTQ people in the church. The Pope chose relatively liberal bishops and cardinals from the United States to be the part of the delegation, including Reverend James Martin, who writes a lot about LGBTQ issues.
Right.
But the U.S. bishops chose conservatives, including Cardinal Dolan. Martin wants to hear from LGBTQ people and says they should all want to hear from LGBTQ people.
Those American bishops do not like the Pope.
No.
In Cameroon, reports of expanding attacks on LGBT people, vandalism at the LGBTQ office, the HIV office, activists attacked, gay bar attacked. Not good news from Cameroon.
AIDS news?
Yes.
Well, public memorials are very fraught things. Lots of disagreements about our own AIDS memorial in New York's Greenwich Village that includes no names of people with AIDS. But Palm Springs proposed a sculpture. And we'll show you a picture of the proposal. A 9-foot limestone, looks like a big donut there on the left with a hole in the middle, that the sculptor says offers a view of hope, but whose design is being derided as looking more like an anus. The task force planning the memorial said they've heard lots of concerns and a revised design is in process and will be revealed later this year. Another controversial statue is nearby, a 26-foot tall Marilyn Monroe, dedicated depicting the 7-year itch where her dress is getting blown up.
Yeah, I remember that. I have to say, when I saw this proposed memorial, my first thought was glory hole. Take your pick. But yeah, I object to the New York memorial as not have any names of people who died. I still think the quilt is the best memorial, but evidently that's a little too much for people.
Okay.
All right. Amsterdam.
Yeah, go ahead.
A new report of really drastic cuts in new HIV infections because they have focused so heavily on prevention and recommending PrEP to people, pre-exposure prophylaxis, medicine that you take when you're HIV negative so that you do not get HIV. Also very heavy emphasis on testing and treating immediately so that you bring people who are positive to a non-transmissible status so that they are not giving it to others. So in 2019, they recorded 128 new HIV infections in Amsterdam. This year, 9.
Yes, and listen to that, and listen to these statistics. HIV infections are down 95% since 2010. 98% of city residents living with HIV have been diagnosed. I mean, the big issue around the world is people not knowing that they have it. 95% of those have received medical treatment, which doesn't happen in this country. And 96% of those on treatment have suppressed the virus to untransmissible levels. This is such a marvelous success in the city of Amsterdam.
I'm always a little confused by statistics that say, we have found 95% of those with the virus. Well, how do you know that? If you're not finding some people, how do you know how many of those there are?
You make a good point.
Anyway, and the HIV and Hepatitis Policy Institute, which works on these issues, has filed a complaint against an insurer in Texas, the Community Health Choice of Texas, because they have an outdated formulary that mandates old, expensive HIV drugs instead of newer versions like the single pill treatment. In Texas, for this insurer, you have to be taking a lot of different drugs, and it's costing everybody a ton of money.
Entertainment news?
Well, I thought you might want to, maybe it's later you want to mention. I got it. Okay. Yes. Sorry.
Tell us what happened at the Mets game, Ann.
Big well, Maybelle Blair, now 96 years old, who you may remember coming out last year as a lesbian at 95. She was an old, women's baseball league player in the World War II days. She has now been honored by the Mets. That's a co-owner of the Mets with her, Alexa Cohen. So she talked about how happy she was to have come out even at 95, and how much support she got from family and friends who she was afraid would reject her, and how much young people have come to her and congratulated her and thanked her for coming out. And the Mets gave $5,000 to Athlete Ally in honor of Maybelle.
There's a new Hallmark Channel movie, Notes of Autumn, features gay and non-gay couples finding romance. The gay couples portrayed there by Luke McFarlane and Peter Porter, the non-gay couple by Ashley Williams, who does a lot of these things, and Marcus Roster. Something to warm us up as the days get cooler, at least here back east. But you've seen it, Ann.
Yes, to segue from the last story, you now cannot swing a bat at a Hallmark movie without finding some gay people in them. But this one is two best friends who live in different cities and swap apartments for job opportunities. And one of them is a gay man, and he ends up with finding a gay man when in the new city, and she ends up finding a straight man in the other city. So it's all very equal and charming and utterly predictable.
A couple of things that are going to be in our weekly email blast, so you can get the details on this. The new fest, the LGBTQ Film Festival here, is October 12th to 24, but you can watch it online anywhere in the world. Yeah. Go to newfest.org for that. And the Broadway Cares Flea Market and Grand Auction is this Sunday, October 1st, star-studded. Go to broadwaycares.org. For that, it's in Schubert Alley and surrounding streets, West 44th and 45th. And mark your calendars. Ann and I are going to be honored by Tosos, The Other Side of Silence, the theater company, on October 16th. And details about that will be in our email.
And Harmony is coming to Broadway, the Barry Manilow, Bruce Sussman show that we enjoyed so much at a theater downtown. I kind of want to go back and see it on Broadway.
Okay, we'll go.
And Ellen is on streaming on Discovery Plus and Max with a 2-hour special called Saving the Gorillas, Ellen's Next Adventure. She and Portia building a conservation campus in Rwanda for wildlife there.
It's on Discovery Plus and Max. Great to be with you. Thanks for watching.
Yes, and we will see you next week.
Okay.